on direct examination, she had said, oh, I've been unemployed for 18 months. And I knew that wasn't true. Like, she'd had a website where she put herself out as a coach and all these other things. And she'd taken down the website before the litigation, but I used the Wayback Machine to like find her old website and to pull it up. And on cross, I said, now you testified earlier that you have been unemployed for 18 months. I wrote it down. That's what you said, right? She said, yes. I said, so for 18 months, you've been without employment? She said, yes, without employment. I said, and this job that you took, you didn't want to move to California. You took it because it was the only opportunity you could get. Is that right? She's like, yeah, absolutely. And I said, after being unemployed for 18 months? She said, yeah. And I could see in her brain, she's going like, oh my God, this is great. Like I'm looking good right now, you know? Which, by the way, never, if I'm cross-examining you, never think you're doing well. You're not. Like I'm walking you into a bear trap, I promise. And I said, now, ma'am, isn't it true that you had a coaching practice up until at least a couple of months ago? Well, yeah, I did. And you didn't have any clients at all? I said, because you had a website, isn't that right? She said, yeah, and you had client testimonials on that website. Did you make all those up? Now, she's screwed. If she says, yes, I made them all up, all right, you're a liar. If you say, oh no, I did have a bunch of coaching clients, okay, you're a liar because you said earlier you were unemployed. So what did she do? Instead of being humble, she tried to play a game. So she said, well, I mean, I've had income, but I haven't been employed. I said, I'm sorry, ma'am. So you're saying you've received money for services you provided? Yes. But you were unemployed? Yes. Ma'am, when I say unemployed, I mean you were without employment. Do you understand that? Oh, yes, that's not how I was defining it. I meant I didn't have like a 9-to-5 job. I was like, right, but you had consulting clients, right? Yes. And you had consulting clients on a regular basis. Yes. And you were in fact making $10,000 a week or so doing that work. Isn't that right? Is somewhere around there. And yet you just testified under oath that you're unemployed. Well, I guess we're just defining it differently. And that's when the performer streak comes out. And I said, well, let's narrow it down. If I'm well, it means I'm healthy. And if I'm unwell, it means I'm no longer healthy. Is that fair? She was like, yes. I said, right now I'm seated and now I'm unseated. Is that fair? She's like, yeah. I'm like, so when you say you're employed, you mean you have income, and when you're unemployed, you don't, right? So earlier when you said you were unemployed for 18 months, that was false. Isn't that a fact? Now, that's the kind of like performative thing you get to do in a courtroom. It's methodical. It's a slow burn, but it's how people come apart on the witness stand. Because after that, she just kind of gave up because she realized, okay, I've just killed my credibility. And now she's pretty beaten up. One of my favorite moments in the history of my practice is I had a particularly vigorous cross-examination of a person. And at one point, she just looked over at the judge and she went, yeah, I can't do this anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. And the judge said, well, ma'am, you will. Mr. Sexton's going to finish his cross-examination. If you're saying you need a break, I'll let you have a 5-minute break. And then you're going to come back and answer the rest of his questions. So she let her off the stand and she's walking out and her lawyer was in front of her. And I'm right behind her, but she didn't realize that I was behind her. And she just looks at her lawyer and she goes, you got to get this guy off of me. And I thought, you know, I could retire right now. That was just such a great moment, you know. There's something about, I mean, I've done crazy things in court. I laid down on the floor of courtroom once in the middle of testimony to illustrate a point.
What was the point?
So a key piece of evidence in the case was where my client was sitting in relation to another person. And the judge didn't like my client. And so I had a witness on the stand who had witnessed what had happened. And I said, okay. I said, Your Honor, can I approach the witness? I said, yeah. I said, I approached the witness stand and I said to this young woman, I said, I'm going to move backwards. And when I get to the distance that my client was from you, I want you to tell me to stop, okay? Because I was trying to establish that She was about 3 feet away from my client. And the other side was trying to say that they were much further apart, like 9 feet away. It would be catastrophic for my case if they were 9 feet away. But 3 feet away, my case is golden. So I approach the stand. I start moving back. I get about 3 feet away. And she goes, stop. And I go, okay. So just to be clear, where I'm standing right now is how far from you my client was on the day of the incident. She says, yes. So I said, Your Honor, if the record could reflect, I'm about, my distance from the witness. Judge says, yeah, the record will reflect you're about 7.5 feet away. I said, I'm sorry, Your Honor, respectfully, I am nowhere near 7 feet away. I'm about 3 feet away. He says, well, Mr. Sexton, do you have a tape measure? Because if you don't have a tape measure, then the record's going to reflect what I'm saying. So I immediately laid down on the floor, stuck my feet against the witness stand. I said, Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect I am laying on the floor, my feet are against the witness stand, and the distance where I was standing is to my knees. I am 6'2". It is about 3 feet. The judge went, Mr. Sexton, get off the floor right now. But I got it in the record. And when we took a break, maybe about 10, 15 minutes later in the testimony, opposing counsel, who's a lawyer I've dealt with before, we walked out of the courtroom together and she just looked at me and she went, I've been doing this a long time and I have never seen anyone lay down on the floor of a courtroom. That is a first and probably be the last time I've ever seen it. It's